we've heard it time and time again. Parenting is hard work. And there's not really a roadmap for what you should do as a parent because every child is different. It's especially difficult when you have a child who has unique needs. When you have a child who has been traumatized and you're trying to help them figure out how to navigate the world. You go to therapy and that doesn't work. You get medications and those don't work. Where does that leave you? It's a tough spot, and it's not uncommon for people who find themselves in those positions to turn to alternative medicine. And within the alternative treatment space, there's a great divide. There's those who have had overwhelmingly positive experiences, who rave about it, who say that mainstream medical approaches didn't help them and their child, and are incredibly thankful to have had the opportunity to turn to these alternative methods, which proved to be beneficial in their case. But then, of course, there's the controversy. There's people who have invested thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into these alternative treatment methods just to find out that they've been victimized by pseudoscience. The controversy surrounding alternative medicine isn't a secret, and it's also not new. This is the story of a woman who felt like she had nowhere else to turn. She was desperate for relief and ended up turning to somebody who maybe she shouldn't have. This is the case of Candace Newmaker. And welcome to another episode of Spooky Saturday. Since you guys liked me having my friend Merritt in the last episode, I thought I should have Kylen in this one.
Hi.
Just kidding. What actually happened is he got really jealous because he was like, why was Merritt in a Spooky Saturday and not me?
You didn't have to out me like that.
I did think it would be cute though.
It'd be fun.
Well, it's not going to be fun. It's going to be really depressing and dark. And Merritt, last time she was also like, it's going to be fun. And I was like, no, it's not. And then she cried. So I just want you to know that it's not going to be a whimsical experience.
All right.
So much as it is like a dark educational.
I'm just here for moral support then.
Okay, that's
I'll support you.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's good. Oh. Before we start, do you know about alternative therapy? Ring her off!
Sin.
Oh my
That's
god!
A sin. I'm so sorry. I cut that, please.
Cancel!
Is it kind of like holistic stuff or like just different?
Yeah, it's kind of like holistic stuff. Sometimes it's like old wives' tales, and sometimes it's just like unique approaches. So it can be anything from like when you're sick, you have chicken noodle soup instead of taking like medicine.
So anything outside of mainstream healthcare.
So like that's like a pretty innocuous one, the soup thing, where it's like, yeah, I mean, you'll be hydrated, it's good.
Or
there's a lot of protein, or ginger ale, flat soda, stuff like that. Like that's technically alternative medicine as well. But then there's also, you know, the whole other side of it where people are taking like synthetic drugs from non-pharmaceutical outlets and things like that.
Yeah. What was the thing Trump recommended we take? Pool cleaner?
Yeah, like everybody drank that pool cleaner and got really sick. Yeah. So with therapy, there's alternative therapy as well.
Right.
And that's like a lot more of a gray area because there are some tried and true things that people know in the psychological space, but there's a lot of things that are still being, you know, learned about the human psyche.
Yeah, well, mental health has just now become like mainstream. Where it's like
where people are taking it seriously. It's finally getting some more funding. Like people in these areas have always cared, but it just didn't always have the same funding it does now.
Especially with the internet and all that. I can't imagine how many mental things are being created.
Yeah, there's like new problems coming up now.
So like problems we never had to deal with before.
Yeah. So. Today we're going to be talking about the story of Candace Newmaker, who Candace Newmaker is a little girl, and she had like a really difficult childhood. So she was born to a teen mom and an abusive dad. I tried to find out how old the dad wasn't specified. So that leads me to believe that he wasn't also a teenager.
Probably uncomfortably older.
Yeah, because they everything I read about her early life, they repeatedly said teen mom, but they didn't say teen parents. So they would just say teen mom, abusive dad. So
is the dad still alive?
This only happened in like the early 2000s, so like probably. Candace, she was one of like several children. She's also not the oldest child. She was one of the younger children. So since her mom was still a teen mom by the time that she had her, she was probably a very early teen mom with the older children. Candace and her siblings, they moved around a lot. They had a very unstable lifestyle as children, so they would bounce from just various trailer parks to sort of dilapidated houses. And there's nothing wrong with living in a trailer park. There's actually some really, really, really nice trailer parks out there that are giving a higher quality of living than like your standard
Suburb.
Apartment. Yeah, and even like some houses. So this is in no way like a condemnation of trailer parks, but the quality of the trailer parks in which she was living were very low.
Yeah.
And so that's also why I specified that like she wasn't only just in trailer parks, she was also in dilapidated housing as well. Just in terms of safety standards, the safety standards were really low. On top of like the fact that her parents were constantly fighting, her father was really abusive to her siblings, and her mother. And there is an implication of like a few different types of abuse with the children, though it's never been like proven or anything. But when we get into like Candace's behavior as she starts developing, it does sort of point to potentially some abuse as a child.
Yikes.
Purely just because a lot of the things that she was doing are symptomatic of that. I'm not like armchair psychologing her. I'm just letting people know it's like a warning, like there's a bit of an implication there, but we don't have any direct evidence of that.
She's like second youngest.
Yeah. At best, her mom had her when she was like 19, so she's like a teen mom still for her.
Yeah.
So I hope her mom's doing better now, if she's still alive. You know, I hope that she's gotten the help that she definitely needs in terms of like support at the very least, because that's very traumatic. Social services ended up removing her and her siblings when she was 3 years old.
Holy, they got her out of there quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Social services was probably like eyeing her parents for a while. This was all also happening in North Carolina, so I don't know what the laws are in North Carolina as far as all of this goes. I don't know if they're very sensitive when it comes to taking children away, or if they're one of those states that takes a pretty long time, like there has to be like a massive inciting incident or something. I'm really not sure.
A lot of documented evidence, and then like witnesses. And,
so if anybody's like a social worker in North Carolina, definitely like comment and let me know, because I would be interested to know. Within 2 years, she bounced between 6 different foster homes. So she was being moved around a lot, and it had a lot to do with her inability to connect in the home with the other children. She was really aggressive also, so she was exhibiting a lot of behavioral issues, and that's a very, unfortunately, it's like an easy way for you to end up getting rehomed throughout the foster system, because obviously foster parents are more inclined to keep the air quote easy kids,
right?
You know, because it makes a more stable environment for the other children that they might be fostering.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, she was just moved around a lot in 2 years. Luckily, she was adopted out by the time she was 5.
Nice.
And so the fact that she was put into the foster care system at such a young age definitely like aided in her being adopted out early, despite the fact that she had these behavioral issues. For a lot of children who have behavioral issues, they don't get adopted out because of that, and then they become like tweens and teens, and then their chances of getting adopted are even lower, and then they're likely just never going to get adopted, and they just are like out in the world trying to figure it out for themselves. But she was lucky enough to be adopted by the time she was 5, and she was actually adopted by a pediatric nurse named Jean. And Jean felt that although she's not like a mental health expert in any way, shape, or form, you know, she's dealing with physical ailments, she felt like because she had a background in medicine that she could handle the issues that Candace was struggling with. And it wasn't long after adopting Candace that she realized that she had definitely underestimated like the extent of Candace's mental health issues. And she had also overestimated her abilities to deal with that. And no husband or boyfriend or girlfriend or wife is ever mentioned in conjunction with Jean. So I believe that Jean adopted her out as a single woman.
Ooh, wow.
So that does add a lot of stress also, just because being a single parent and a nurse, which is a very demanding schedule, it's very difficult in general, even if you had a child who wasn't dealing with these sort of developmental delays and behavioral issues.
It's hard just being a nurse.
Yeah, it's hard just being a nurse in general with a family, and if you have a partner even helping you. It's just it's a tough job.
So I'm assuming because she adopted, was she older or like the nurse?
I think that Jean was older. Her age when she was adopted wasn't specified, at least not where I was looking, but I did see pictures of Jean, and she did look like solidly
Older.
middle-aged.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
so...
the only reason I ask is because, like, maybe she was unable to have kids, and that's why she adopted, and, like, she felt like she just missed out.
Or she just never got married, and she didn't want to get, like, a surrogate, you know? I think it was something like that. Just because if I had to, like, guess her age just based on her pictures, sorry if this is incorrect, Jean, I would say that she looked like she was about, like, late 30s, mid to mid 40s.
Okay.
At least circa 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not unheard of for people to have children at that age, but, like,
it's
definitely...
it's entirely, especially now, it's become, like, much more common.
But extremely difficult.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
It's expensive as well. I mean, adopting a child is also expensive, but she might just not believe in IVF. A lot of people don't.
Could be, yeah.
She adopted her out, and then she realized she was kind of in over her head. And what's really interesting is Candace didn't display any behavioral issues in school. All of Candace's teachers, when they were asked about her behavior, they didn't have any problems with her. She was a good student. She was a good listener. She didn't have any issues with other kids. Like, at most, she would just watch the other kids play from a distance. Like, she was a bit of a wallflower.
Yeah.
But she wasn't getting in fights. She wasn't causing any problems. That, which probably just kind of frustrated Jean a little bit more. Because Jean's like, well, how come she's doing fine in school, but she's having a hard time connecting with me? You know, like, I just want to be there for her and, like, love her and care for her. What's going on? Like, is it something I'm doing?
I'm guessing it's because, like, being home is a trigger, probably.
Yeah.
And being at school is, like, a safe space. Because, like, I know, like, a lot of things you hear in, like, a lot of your other stories, like, that surround, like, children, like, being disruptive at home. And then they go to school and they feel like that's their escape.
Yeah, it's
from
like a
their
sense
house.
of relief. Because, like, school's always been very stable and regimented, whereas the home is really chaotic.
Right.
That's pretty much the same conclusion that Jean came to. And so she had Candace in counseling since adopting her because she knew her context. Unfortunately, like, talk therapy just was not going well at all. And Jean believed that this was likely because Candace perceived the therapist as a form of a parental figure, whereas she knew that teachers were, like, a different thing, like, still a source of authority in your life, but not like a parent. Whereas, like, she felt like the therapist, by trying to, like, connect with her and, like, dig deep, it felt more like pseudo-parent bond.
And also kind of, I imagine since she was in the foster system, probably, like, CPS, like, kind of like...
it's probably kind of similar, like, to just your typical social worker experience, you know, because they're used to talking to kids in a certain way and trying to connect and make them feel safe.
And also when you're that young, it's hard to utilize, like, a therapist.
Yeah, it
fully,
is.
You know?
They
like,
have
you
to
don't
use
understand.
a unique approach to try and, like, figure out what's going on with the children. It's less like, how have you been feeling, and more like playing games and, like, doing different things and trying to see what sort of reactions and asking sort of, like, leading questions, I think.
It's a lot more vague.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more up to the interpretation of, like, the therapist, and I think it's a lot more, like, pattern-based of, like, oh, well, with kids struggling with this, we tend to see this kind of a situation. But what was the problem was therapy, you know, it would just sort of, like, it would, like, devolve into just these episodes for Candace pretty much every single time. So almost every session ended with, like, spitting, like Candace spitting on the therapist, or, like, biting the therapist. So it would get, like, very, very, like, aggressive very quickly. They also tried to medicate Candace. They tried 2 different medications which weren't specified, but I'm assuming they were probably downers to try and, like, help her. Like
Ritalin or...
like, probably just
Lexapro
anti-anxiety stuff, like maybe something like Xanax adjacent. I don't know if you can give children Xanax, but I'm assuming they were probably, like, calming, regulating medicines. And they just didn't find that they were effective because, like, anytime that Candace was in the home, she was just so dysregulated and just so upset. And so it got to a point where, like, Jean had been doing this for years and she wasn't seeing any results. And she was getting really frustrated. And so she was trying to research on her own and figure out like what could be going on with Candace, because the therapist only has like limited insight into Candace as well, because like she's a tough nut to crack. She's just having episodes. The therapist can only draw certain conclusions of like what Candace may have diagnostically, but it's harder to like get answers from Candace. Jean considered Candace to have what in her words were extreme psychological issues. I have like a list of some of the issues that Candace was displaying, which I would agree that these are pretty extreme, especially for a child of Candace's age.
Right.
As like a non-expert.
How old is she right now?
Right now she is 7.
7, okay.
Yeah, she's approximately 7 years old at this point in time that this was like noted about her. So she was experiencing extended fits of rage. She killed her pet goldfish. One of these fits of rage. It like, didn't say. I'm assuming she like took her out of the water. Yeah. She started a fire in the home. Yeah, that's pretty extreme. She was extremely defensive at home, and she was extremely negative at home, even when she wasn't having like these fits of anger. Just any attempt that Jean had to like engage with her would just be met with like a very negative response.
Yeah.
But most concerning of all is actually around this time, Candace essayed 2 other children.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, which that's what makes me think that something was likely going on in her childhood, because that...
You don't do that unless someone does that to you.
Yeah, I mean, you can out of like a child exploration that happens
But it
sometimes.
seems like under the context, it seems...
Yeah, with the context we have, it seems like this could have easily just been like Candace mirroring something that she had experienced, not realizing that it was like damaging to the other children, especially just because of how like young she is, and it didn't seem as experimental from what we do know about it.
That's rough. It's hard to say whether that was her birth parents or even the foster.
Exactly. It could be anything. Like, it could have been like
the children, or like
because like the abuse from her dad was so like vaguely like non-specified. Likely because they were getting testimonies from the children. So like that's probably why it was so vague. And the children were all very young. But that could very easily be a result of like foster parents, older foster children. It's just like, since she had changed houses so many times,
it's hard to
she'd passed through so many people's hands, it's really hard to know, you know, where the origins of something like that could have been.
If she's been exhibiting this behavior for...
Yeah, like if she's been exhibiting it the whole time and it's just been unreported, or if it's like a new behavior. It could have even just been post-foster care. It could have been like maybe something happened at school, you know, like we have no idea.
No clue.
Yeah. And like we're not getting answers from Candace.
Yeah.
You know? Jean started doing her own research on like just Candace's general symptoms, because like she's getting increasingly concerned. I'm assuming she's probably like pretty burnt out.
Yeah, it's been years now.
It's been years. She's trying to work on this, and she's not gaining any ground. That's pretty frustrating. And also it seems that like Candace's behaviors are just sort of escalating with time. Like she hasn't found a way to like emotionally regulate or like, you know, get any sort of outlet for any of this. I mean, school's not really an outlet, because it's just sort of like, it's when her like behavior is a little bit on pause, but I wouldn't say that that's the same as like getting these feelings out. She started to suspect that Candace might have reactive attachment disorder, which is very rare, by the way, because before I list the symptoms, I think a lot of these symptoms could seem sort of broad, and so I just don't want anyone watching this to be like, do I have that? Because probably not. It is very rare, and it's also, despite the fact that it's still considered to be very rare, it's often overdiagnosed. At least that's what people in the psychiatric space believe, is that it's been overdiagnosed on average.
Kind of like when you look up WebMD symptoms. You're like, what's up?
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh my god, is it
Or
this?
you're like, is that me? Yeah, exactly. Whereas like you probably just have general stress and fatigue most of the time, or you have a cold, you know. But yeah, so RAD it's usually
rad.
Yeah, but it's not rad.
It's not rad.
It's super not rad. But the way in which like one would get that is you have a failure to develop an attachment to your caretaker when you're an infant.
Isn't that like you don't get enough skin to skin type deal?
It could be a couple things. So like there's two prongs to it. So like the first is just that like you're super neglected as like a baby, so your needs aren't met at all, and like you've just kind of been forgotten about, like a classic situation of like parents just ditching a baby in a crib, dirty diaper all the time.
Like a lot of neglect.
Yeah, like severe neglect.
Yeah.
or abuse, but it's generally from neglect in that instance. The other way that it can happen is if the infant does have a really strong bond with their caretaker, and then they're removed from that caretaker in a super traumatic way. And so that bond is severed, and it's never reattached anywhere else.
So like a traumatic, like, accident type deal.
It can be an accident, but it can also be when a child is rehomed. And actually, like, there have been cases in Africa, you know, because it's just very missionary heavy, where people come through the villages. A lot of those children in those villages will bond to missionaries who will only be there for like a week and then leave, and it's so cyclical that they can develop it because they're trying to form attachments with people, but those people never stay.
Right.
So like that's a sort of niche way in which people can get it, but to mirror that, like children who go through the foster care system and are constantly rehomed, that can cause it if they're very young, and that's happening. I'm going to read out a list of, like, if you're diagnosed with RAD, like the symptoms you would be exhibiting. Unexplained withdrawal, sadness, fear, or irritability. That's one of the broader ones that could also just be, you know, depression or anxiety. Listless appearance. That is that's like sort of a hallmark for it when you see like children with the 40-yard stare who are very young.
Okay.
Yeah. Doesn't seek comfort at all. Like when upset, like if somebody goes to like hug you, you're like, I don't want that. If like they fall and hurt themselves, they don't look for help for anybody. Just like very like inward. Doesn't smile. That's like a real hallmark of it as well, because young children generally, even if they're not happy, they're very expressive. So like they'll flip between smile, frown, scowl, like they're practicing all of their expressions and mirroring the adults around them. So if a child's not mirroring the adults around them, it's because like they don't have any history of doing that, and that's why they don't smile. Watches social gatherings but doesn't engage.
So watching kids play at school.
Yeah. Behavioral problems.
Okay, yeah, that seems very broad besides the listlessness, which, like, seeing a kid with a 40-yard stare would freak me out, because I'd be like, dude, what's going on?
I mean, I think when I have seen that, it's usually children who are from, like, war-torn countries, which would make sense. That's a huge trauma.
Yeah.
But also children who have PTSD or CPTSD can also exhibit the 40-yard stare. It is a really controversial it's like a super controversial diagnosis, which is not to say that it doesn't exist. It's just because it's one of those things where it's like super, super rare, and because the criteria is so broad.
Yeah, and I could see why it gets overdiagnosed, because like, while the listlessness and not smiling and watching social gatherings seems to be kind of specific, that could be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
That aren't necessarily that. It could be something completely different that also has that, but I guess that's what makes being like a child therapist so difficult.
Yeah, since Jean thought that was what Candace was experiencing, and she was exhausted by trying to pursue traditional treatment methods, she decided to start looking into non-traditional treatment methods, which I don't think is inherently problematic necessarily. I think that's just sort of something a lot of people in desperate situations do. There's a lot of people who will be pursuing traditional, like, cancer treatments and then also try and do a non-traditional approach on the side in addition to the traditional approach, just to try and see. Or, like, there's an experimental treatment, which is still mainstream medicine, but it's not uncommon, my point is, if you're in a desperate enough situation, to seek alternative solutions.
Right, yeah.
You know?
I mean, I can't falter.
Yeah, I mean, just the impulse to look for it in the first place, I think, is very human, you know? So when she was doing that, because likely I'm assuming she was searching with, like, RAD in mind, she discovered reattachment therapy. And so reattachment therapy is a method. I'm going to make it sound better than it is really quick, because this is the way I'm assuming that it's sold to people.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you, like, the reality of it. But reattachment therapy is supposed to be that you and your child go on, like, a 2-week experience where you spend the first week, like, bonding, going through more traditional therapeutic approaches, and then the second week you do the reattachment session, which is supposed to be an experience between you and your child where you mimic a sort of rebirth so that they can have basically a second chance at that initial bonding stage that you're supposed to have when you're born with your parent.
Right. Why do I get the feeling that the rebirth is a little...
Yeah.
Like, I understand the need for, like a ceremony, and I feel like having a week off and, like, doing things to grow closer together could be very helpful for a struggling parent connecting with their foster.
It's also sort of the vacation effect of, like, a change of environment can sort of, like, help ease the day-to-day tension, especially if being in the home is, like, triggering for Candace.
The only reason I'm really uneasy about this rebirth ceremony is because, A, the disclaimer at the beginning where you're like, no, this isn't going to be happy fun time. This is going to be sad, depressed time.
Yeah.
And also you said that you're going to make it sound better than it is, so...
Right. So I'm assuming that that's the way in which it's, like, pitched, is it's like, we're going to basically, like, you know... reopen these wounds and heal them properly, you know. When really what the ceremony is for reattachment therapy, and this is, like, not just this specific place that was doing this is just, like, all the places that do reattachment therapy, which is now very limited because of this, but basically what they do is they wrap these children in, like, blankets and put pillows over them to simulate, like, being in the womb.
Okay.
And then they'll have, like, a couple adults press down to apply pressure. When a baby's in the womb, they're under a lot of, like, pressure. They're sort of, like, tight in. That's why you swaddle a baby, to sort of, like, get them used to being out in the world. But reminder, like, these aren't babies. These are, like, children.
It's a 7-year-old.
No, by the time that Jean took Candace to reattachment therapy, she was 10.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
So this is a 10-year-old that they're trying to mimic, like, the birth canal to. So what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to, like, apply a lot of pressure, and the parent that they're trying to attach to is supposed to essentially, like, cosplay as if they're actually actively giving birth.
Okay.
So they're supposed to say, like, positive things, like the parent is.
Yeah.
They're supposed to say positive things of, like, I'm so excited to have a baby that I can, like, love and take care of and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, like, the practitioners of this, because I'm not going to say, like, psychologists, because no licensed psychologist is doing this. The practitioners of this will be applying a lot of pressure and then saying more negative, stressful things to the child. And the child is essentially supposed to fight their way out, basically to, like, prove that they want to be born, which, like, I don't see the relevancy of that, but whatever. It's supposed to create a really stressful and, more than that, controlling environment wherein the child's supposed to subconsciously take away that they can be controlled by the parent and be in a stressful situation that feels like life or death without anything bad actually happening to them. I mean, obviously it's pseudoscience, so, like, it's gonna be flawed, but, like, it's blatantly so flawed to me because I actually wouldn't have the takeaway of, I was under all of that stress and it felt life or death and nothing happened to me. My takeaway would be, like, you put me in that stressful situation that felt like life or death. I was traumatized, so something did happen to me.
I'm also claustrophobic,
That's
and
what I'm saying.
being wrapped in blankets and have several adults press down on me would send me into, like, a panic attack.
Yeah, and it's supposed to send the child into a panic attack, which is also, I don't see the benefit of that. And then they, like, chastise them the whole time.
Not cool.
Yeah, so I don't really see how that would, like, psychologically benefit you, but some people online, I'm sure, must have been, like, swearing by it because Jean decided, and this is in 2000, so, like, I can't even imagine what the price would be right now. Jean decided to spend $7,000 on this therapy method for, like, a 2-week experience. Yeah, so clearly, like, she must have believed in this because, like, a nurse only makes so much money. It's a good job, but it's still $7,000 in 2000.
Don't know what
That's a lot of money. So, like, she clearly felt like it was worth it. Also in Colorado.
And I feel like if you sign up for something like that, if it has, like, a high cost of entry,
it makes it seem a little more legitimate.
Yeah, because you'd be like, well, I don't want to go to, like, one that's only, like, $1,000.
Yeah, you're like, I want to make sure that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to pick a a good place. And more than that, this guy, from what I can tell, was never held responsible for this, and I don't understand how. But the way in which Jean ended up going to this specific place was because in North Carolina, where she lived, she talked to their local psychiatrist that they had been working with, and he recommended that she go to this woman in Colorado who was unlicensed.
So a licensed
professional recommended this woman who was unlicensed. So I feel like he should have faced some repercussions for that, and he, from what I can tell, did not.
That seems really strange.
It is really strange. The high cost of entry and his recommendation, it just makes it seem like much more legitimate, you know? Because, like, why would he be recommending that? And I don't think that they had some, I don't know what their personal relationship was or something.
Some sort of deal going on.
Yeah, I don't know. Like a commission deal or something. I have no idea. The first week, which from what I can tell was just like normal therapy retreat stuff.
Right.
Went really well, actually.
Oh.
And it seems that, like, Candace was actually having, like, some positive takeaways.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Then the second week started, and that's when they were like, we're going to do this reattachment ceremony thing.
Right, yeah.
I already told you a lot of what it entails, but just to be a little bit more specific, like, while they're wrapped up in the blanket with the pillows on them and the pressure applied and the parents cosplaying, the therapist, if they get mad, is supposed to, like, double down on the aggression towards them. Yeah, it is like a...
What?
The air quote therapist, by the way. Like, the...
If they get mad?
Yeah, they're supposed to tighten their grip, like if the child gets upset while they're in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be a part of that whole controlling thing, where it's, like, supposed to demonstrate that the child's not the one in control. Which, like, certainly you can't let your child run your life, but, like, I would say that this is very different from that.
Having a stranger chokehold your child because they get upset.
Get upset over being smothered, yeah.
That you sign them up for.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, again, like, I do have, like, some sympathy for Jean, because, like, she didn't really understand what she was, like, getting into, and she doesn't know if this is, like, valid stuff or not. Like, she's not an expert in this. But at the same time, like, you know, I think were she not in such a desperate situation, she would have seen all of these red flags. They're supposed to fight their way out, and that's supposed to simulate being born. Let's get into the 5 adults that were present, because there's 5 adults. There's Jean, of course. Then there's the woman who, I'm going to call her the practitioner, because I refuse to call this woman a therapist, because she's not. Connell Watkins. So I'm just going to call her Watkins. Practitioner Watkins. She's unlicensed. This is her operation. Then her, like, assistant practitioner, who again was saying that she's a therapist despite the fact that she's unlicensed, Julie Ponder. So I'm going to call her Practitioner Ponder, or just Ponder.
Ponder and Watkins.
Yeah, Ponder and Watkins, this is their whole thing. Watkins is, like, the main lady. Ponder's, like, her right hand.
Like,
she's not, like,
assistant?
Yeah, she's not, like, fully an assistant, because they have assistants. But
intern?
No, they have an intern as well. It's supposed to be that, like, they're sort of, like, partners, but I'm pretty sure Watkins is the one who, like, owns and started this operation. There's Rita, who is the office manager. It seems that Rita never presented herself as a therapist or a counselor, so it was supposed to be known that she's just an office manager helping with this rebirthing session.
Seems really strange.
Yeah, it does seem strange, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then her boyfriend was also there. Yeah.
What?
Yes. His name is Jack McDaniel, and Rita is Rita St. Clair. Her boyfriend is an intern.
Okay.
Presumably an office intern, since, like, I would assume he was working under Rita. But he's also there, and he's one of the 5 adults who are supposed to be, like, holding down.
Right.
This whole session was videotaped, so, like, it's 100% confirmed that all 5 of these adults are in this room, and they're all engaging in this.
Yeah.
By the way, the guy who recommended this, like the actual licensed therapist who recommended this, his name is William Gobble. I don't know if he's still practicing, because, like I said, it seems like he faced no repercussions for this, but William Gobble in North Carolina, maybe don't see that guy. When this whole thing starts, Candace is told by Watkins to assume the fetal position. They then wrap her in a flannel blanket, which, like, I feel like any blanket would be bad. I feel the fact that it's flannel, which is like really a very dense fabric, is also a contributing factor here.
I would do one that has like holes.
Yeah,
like
it wasn't.
this.
It wasn't like this. Is what I'm trying to say. Like
at least I would feel better because I could breathe through this.
Yeah.
But like a solid
It's
flannel.
a solid flannel blanket, and so they wrap her, and it's wrapped around her head. And
it's
everything.
probably Colorado, so it's like a warm blanket.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it gets cool.
Like
there.
a fleece of sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ! All right.
So like they wrap her in this blanket, and then they put like several, so 4 to 5 pillows on top of her.
Okay. So I'm imagining.
And she's in the fetal position in the blanket. So like that's like a tough. That would be tough for like an adult with one other adult keeping them under there to get out right away at least. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like if someone really wanted to keep you in there,
especially if they wrap the blanket under you.
Yeah.
So like
it's wrapped all the way around her like burritoed.
So if you like, because if you push up, you fight against yourself at that point.
Yeah. There's like nowhere to go. Yeah.
Oh, that's my nightmare. This is a nightmare.
Yeah.
I would already be like, no, I'm not doing this, man.
Yeah. I know, but she's not in control because she's 10.
Yeah,
you know?
well,
and she already has all of these behavioral issues, so no one, basically, to be frank, no one really cared what Candace thought of any of this.
Right.
Which is like a problem in and of itself. The adults begin pressing down on Candace. Before I actually read the transcript of everything that's happening, which like the video footage is available online, I'm not sure like what people would feel about that. I wouldn't recommend watching it. I watched it with just the transcript to the side of it, with just still images instead of the actual raw footage, because like that just, I didn't feel like I needed to see that. And even that was very upsetting, so I'm just gonna read the transcript to you guys, and it's an abridged transcript also, because like it's an hour-long session, so I'm just reading like the most notable like highlights of it. But I'm just saying, if you look up this case, like that video will come up, and I wouldn't recommend watching it.
So skip to this timestamp if you want to just
if you don't want to know what was said. Yeah. Ponder starts asking her questions, and I'm going to read these directly because like these are direct quotes and they're very like chilling, and I don't want to like mince words. So first, Ponder says, imagine yourself as a teeny little baby in your mother's womb and what it felt like. Warm. It felt tight because her stomach was all around you. What do you think you thought about while you were in there? And then Candace replies with, I thought I was going to die in there. Yeah, Candace she's dark, you know, like when they say that she was very negative, like that's kind of what they mean.
I kind of think that she was panicking and she said gonna die in there because she feels like she's gonna die in here. Like she's wrapped, like, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Wild.
So then at this point, Jean begins talking about how excited she is to have a baby, to love, and to keep safe. Mm-hmm. Which makes me sad because it seems like, you know, she's buying into this experience. She's trying to do everything that, you know, she can. It gets to a point where I stop feeling bad for Jean, but at this point in the process, I did feel bad for Jean. Right. It seems like, you know, she's engaged, she's trying to just, like, follow the instructions, and she's really taking the whole process to heart. Watkins then tells Candace, okay, before I actually get into this, a lot of the stuff Watkins says is just very odd. It's just odd stuff. So Watkins then tells Candace if a baby doesn't choose to be born, it dies, and that it's a wonderful thing when a baby chooses to be born, and asks if Candace is ready to be born, telling her that she needs to come out head first and push really hard with her feet to escape, and if she doesn't, her and her mom will both die. That's what I'm saying, like, a lot of this is just, like,
odd.
It's odd. Yeah, it's just odd, like, it's odd stakes that are being added to this. It just seems like a lot of unnecessary stress. Then Candace starts freaking out, and she starts asking who is sitting on her. And she keeps saying that she can't breathe. She's screaming. She's begging to be let go. And she literally says, quote, I'm going to die. It's important to note that, like, the combined weight of these 5 adults pressing down on Candace exceeds 600 pounds.
See, that's the other thing. Why do you need 5 adults? You could probably do, like, 2.
You could probably do 1. And if anyone's pushing down on this child, it should probably be their parents, because I get the whole, like, oh, they're worried the parents are going to pull back, but, like, yeah, maybe that should be allowed. Because, like, first of all, you should never be putting a blanket over someone's head. Anyway. But, like, maybe if the parents are worried that their child's freaking out too much, then, like, let the child out, you know? But that's why this is, like, not a legitimate, you know, thing.
Yeah.
So Ponder then asks, do you want to die?
Hey, what?
Yeah, because I think I think their whole thing is supposed to try and create a life and death scenario.
Yeah.
But, like, the danger of that is, like, not knowing if somebody actually needs help. Like, there's no safe word. And Candace says, no, but I'm going to. Please, I can't breathe. I can't do it anymore. Please stop pushing on me. And she's, like, begging for help.
See, I would have broke. Like, I'd be like, get the off. Like, get off.
That's what I'm saying. Then the adults, and this is what really bothered me when I was, like, seeing, like, the stills, is the adults then start role-playing about contractions. What they claim they thought is that, like, oh, it's normal, the kids always freak out in there, which, like, of course they always freak out in there. Maybe that's why you shouldn't be doing it. They were like, yeah, this is just, like, part of it. Like, Jean thought that this was, like, normal and expected this to happen, so she's not, like, hearing alarm bells, I guess. They're role-playing about contractions of, like, oh, I can, like, feel, like, the baby's coming, like, stuff like that, while Candace is quite literally suffocating. Candace says, can you let me have some oxygen? You mean, like, you want me to die for real? They're talking about these life and death stakes, and, like, Candace, being 10, had, like, an awareness that it's supposed to be, like, hypothetical, you know, like, it's not supposed to be real. And now, since she's actually suffocating, she's like, were you guys really being serious the whole time? Like, when you were talking about that, like, did you mean that? And then Ponder says, go ahead and die right now, for real. Go ahead and die. It's easier, and it takes a lot of courage to be born. At best, she just, like, thinks Candace is being dramatic, which is, like, a big risk, and at worst, she just doesn't care.
Like, could you imagine, like, a licensed psychologist?
It would never happen.
That to you?
It would never happen. That's why these people don't have licenses. So then Candace says, you promised me oxygen. And Ponder says, you've got to fight for it. Which, like, Candace has been fighting this whole time, but she's 10 and there's 600 pounds of pressure on her chest. 20 minutes into this, Candace vomits and she says she needs to use the bathroom. And they ignore her. She defecates and they tell her, go ahead and stay in there with the poop and vomit. So, like, that indicates to me that in previous sessions with other children have likely thrown up, defecated, or wet themselves. It's obviously so normalized to these people that, like, they had no reaction to it. That's something that should never be normalized to you, because that's incredibly dangerous.
That's something an animal dies. Like when an animal's, like, in life or death, like, it shits itself, and it's, like, trying to get away.
So the fact that, like, they aren't reacting to that indicates to me that, like, other children have done that, which means that they very nearly killed, like, potentially dozens of kids. Candace says, it's hot and I can't breathe. And Ponder tells her to scream. Yeah, and then Candace says no, in, like, sort of like a whisper. And then Ponder asks McDaniel to apply more pressure. And mind you, he is already leaning on a pillow that's on Candace's head.
Yeah.
So, like, he's already, like, putting, like, half his body weight on Candace's head, which is, like, I don't know why that would ever be happening. He's, like, an intern, so I don't know how many of these he's done, but, like, just common sense, you know, like...
Even as, like...
And, like, Ponder seeing that he's over her head, telling him to apply more pressure, like, what's going on?
I would have stepped out if I was a helper. I would have stepped out a long time ago. It's insane to me that, like, I feel uncomfortable listening to this. I can't imagine being a part of it. And having the doctor say, like, hey, push harder. I'd be like, no, what the fuck are we doing?
Watkins says, getting pretty tight in there, to Ponder. And then Ponder says, yup, less and less air all the time. She gets to be stuck in there with her poop and vomit. So, like, basically indicating that, like, if Candace wanted to get out, she would. And it's like, Candace clearly can't get out. Like, there's, like, a grown man putting, like, all of his weight on her head. If she could have gotten out, she would have gotten out after she threw up. Like, no child who's 10 years old wants to be covered in their own vomit. 40 minutes in, Watkins calls Candace a quitter, and Candace says her final word, which is just no. It's really sad. And they're just taking this as Candace being, like, defiant, which, like, she is, but in, like, an almost inspirational context of just, like, she's going through this literally just such traumatic way to go out, and she's, like, refusing to give these terrible people what they want. You know, like, Candace is obviously, like,
always been a fighter, which has, like, contributed a lot to her behavioral issues, which might be inconvenient for people, but, like, she's developed those coping mechanisms for a reason. Then they continue to berate Candace, who's unresponsive, for another, like, 20 minutes. Before eventually they decide that they need a break. Because they're tired of pushing on her. So they're exhausted just from pushing on her. They stay in the same room, but they, like, stop applying pressure to her. They don't unwrap her or anything, by the way. They just leave her under the blanket with her vomit and poop. And they just sit on, like, the couches in the room and start talking to each other normally about unrelated stuff. Literally, they start talking about vacation homes. That's how cavalier the vibes are in there.
Do they not think it's weird she's not moving?
No. No one even checks on her. And this is where I lost, like, any, like, dwindling respect or empathy I had for Jean, because
if you're
the fact
a nurse,
that she didn't,
like,
you're a
worried.
nurse, and like, when the second that she vomited, being a nurse, a pediatric nurse no less, Jean should have been like, whoa. And like, the second that any discussion of like putting any pressure or like anything over her mouth and head, like, Jean should have put a stop to that, despite how desperate she was. Like, she quite literally knows better, and therefore, like, I can't like abide by, like, Jean's, like, dismissal of these, like, very dangerous actions. But more than that, like, knowing that, like, Candace is lying under this blanket, whether she's, like, fake sleeping to be dramatic or if she's just actually knocked out, being under there with, like, poop and vomit, you would pull the blanket off of her and be like, do a check-in of sorts, you know, and be like, hey, like, I know this is, like, a difficult experience, like, this is just so that we can help you, like, you know, like, just, like, the total, like, detachment is, like, odd. They take, like, a 20-minute break, and Candace is just dead on the floor in front of them, and she has been for, like, a while, because she was already unresponsive before they stopped. They're just, like, talking over her body about vacation homes, literally.
Wild.
Yeah. After their break, Watkins says, and I quote, "Let's talk to the twerp," which somebody who's supposed to be presenting themselves as, like, a therapist, like, unlicensed or not, like, why would you be using, like, demeaning language towards your patient? Like, you just wouldn't be. I mean, obviously this lady's, like, a walking liability and, like, a nightmare, but...
This seems like some sort of weird fetish she has.
Like, she definitely just...
demeaning children.
She just likes to, like, abuse children, I think,
is
her whole
weird
thing, especially because we get a lot more info on her later. This is definitely just, like, her little loophole to be cruel to children, 100%. If I had to play unlicensed therapist and give her a diagnosis, I would say, like, she's definitely, like, a sadist with, like, a fixation on children. She says, like, let's talk to the twerp, and they pull the blanket off of her, and she's blue. Because she's dead.
Yeah.
And then at this moment, the second they pull the blanket off and Jean sees her, she sees that Candace is blue, she immediately starts freaking out. And they call 911. Interestingly, Watkins is the one who gives CPR to Candace, not Jean. Which,
she's
like,
a nurse.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's kind of weird. Like, I clocked that immediately where I was like, I understand that she's panicking, but if anybody has, you know, resuscitation training for children, especially because I have resuscitation training for children, you have to do CPR different on babies, small children, which 10 is still a small child, adults, and elderly people. There's different approaches for all of them because, like, their bone structure is different, their organs are different sizes. If you tried to do adult CPR on somebody who's, say, like 5, yeah, you can crush their ribs and burst their lungs.
Yeah.
You know? So, like, you have to do a whole different approach. So I thought it was strange that Jean wouldn't be the one administering that.
Very weird.
I think that's weird. And, like, I didn't really see anybody else, like, mention that either. Which, like, I think a lot of people maybe were giving Jean a pass just because it's, like, a traumatic moment, but I think it's odd.
If you were a true parent, you would be the first person to work on
that's what I'm saying. I think it's odd. I think it's odd because she
if you're a practitioner.
She has the most training, and I've had kids have, like, accidents in the water in front of me as a lifeguard, and they're not my kids, and I reacted right away. And she would have the same training, if not more, that I had as, like, a lifeguard. You know,
she's got how many
as a
years
pediatric
of
nurse, that's what I'm saying. Like, she would be used to having to deal with children in emergencies. Basically, they call 911 and EMS arrives within 10 minutes. And so, like, from what they know, Candace has been incapacitated for 30 minutes by this point in time.
She's probably dead, yeah.
Yeah, well, they actually, shockingly, I couldn't believe this, they did manage to get a pulse.
Oh,
She was ruled brain dead because, like, she had been
without oxygen for so long.
For way too long. Way too long. Because, like, that's not even... Like, 30 minutes is being generous. It was probably closer to 50.
Yeah.
You know, because, like, she was unresponsive for 20 minutes under that blanket before they took that
they
break.
got a pulse, though.
I know. I actually couldn't believe that they got a pulse. Like, they were clearly doing anything and everything that they could to try and resuscitate her. But, yeah, she was ruled brain dead and she passed away the next day in the hospital. She would have been under that 600 pounds of pressure for upwards of 40 minutes.
That's
so, also the fact that Candace was even conscious for 40 minutes with that much pressure, especially with so much of it being concentrated on her head and chest, and she was in the fetal position, it is crazy. The trial was, like, incredibly frustrating. I mean, they had the footage because the EMS reported right away, so, like, they didn't have, like, a chance to, like, get rid of that evidence if they wanted to, I don't think. But throughout the trial, Watkins had, like, the strangest approach to this trial. She was very much so on a high horse the whole time, where she kept, like, making statements about how, like, this is a senseless tragedy. She's devoted her life to trying to help children in difficult situations like Candace, and she's just so sad to have learned of something like this happening to one of her patients. Just, like, very detached, very much so trying to paint herself as, like, someone who has the moral high ground, and, like, 100% just distancing herself. She treats it like it was a senseless tragedy for the entire trial, and never once acts like it was, like, a murder at all, or even, like, manslaughter. On June 18th in 2001, which is poetically exactly a year after this death, both the unlicensed therapists were charged for child endangerment resulting in death, which is actually a higher charge than murder via neglect.
Nice.
So they really threw the book at them, but the most that you can get for that is 60 years.
Well, they're gonna die probably because I imagine they're older.
Yeah,
than
they
20.
were like middle aged, so that it's essentially like a life sentence for them.
I think it's light.
Then, of course, like the office manager Rita and her boyfriend, which, like, the boyfriend claimed during the trial, by the way, that, like, at no point did he ever put his full weight on. Yeah.
There's footage of you, my guy.
Yeah, and he's also, like, the one who obviously weighed the most.
And he's the one who was pushing on her
head. Yeah, so he definitely was trying to just, like, kind of avoid a conviction, I think, with that. They got off really light, purely just because they weren't, like, the ringleaders, and they were just, like, employees following instructions, which I personally don't think should really excuse common sense, personally. But,
choking out a child under blankets seems weird. I wouldn't even follow that order.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that just doesn't seem appropriate to me. But, yeah, they got 10 years of probation, so no prison time.
No prison time?
They got 10 years of probation and 1,000 hours of community service. Yeah. And I have to assume that's purely just because, like, it wasn't their practice. Because, like, all 5 of them are on camera doing the same stuff.
I'm assuming everybody in this case is white.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably why.
Yeah.
That's... Well, I wasn't sure, because Rita's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Rita is also white, yeah.
Didn't know, yeah. But, yeah, nah, that's...
Yeah.
Nah, they just clip all of them.
Yeah, and that leaves Jean as the final person. So also, Rita and McDaniel, they were in a separate trial, by the way. So, like, the first trial was just the 2 unlicensed therapists. Then there was Rita and McDaniel. Then there's Jean. Jean pled guilty. Like, Jean didn't try and, like, circumvent any responsibility.
As she should.
At all. Like, she basically was like, I took her to this treatment thing, like, on the recommendation of someone, sure, but, like, it was ultimately, I'm the one who took her.
Which is wild he wasn't dragged into this case.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't really understand how he wasn't.
I feel like he should have been at the very least,
it's got to be a legal
disciplined.
loophole. It's got to be a legal loophole. Like, I feel like he should have lost his license, and maybe he did, but I didn't see any evidence that he did.
He definitely should have, like...
If he didn't, he should have.
Some sort of discipline, because, like, having a therapist recommend you to an unlicensed practitioner seems like a
huge
wild thing. Like, if a doctor were to do something like that, they would be kicked out and probably charged with something.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they would be, maybe they wouldn't be. Now I'm not so sure.
Yeah, but I bet it's because it was like early 2000s and therapy wasn't like a thing yet.
Probably. So she pled guilty, and she made like no attempts to like plead down or anything, because like I do feel like a little bad for Jean, because she clearly is like she's like the only person who's like blatantly remorseful. I mean, like the manager, the office manager and assistant, they were like crying, like they felt bad. They like basically were like pleading that they were like ignorant to like the risks of all of this. But Watkins like expressed like zero remorse even later,
Psychopath.
Post-sentencing. And like Jean was obviously out of everybody like the most remorseful, and basically was like, I just wanted to like help Candace, but I'm also literally directly responsible for her death, and I'm not going to like try and pretend like that's not the case. So she got 4 years of a suspended sentence, and ultimately, because she was like so blatantly like remorseful, they ended up actually like scrubbing it from her record, which I think is an overcorrection personally. Because, like, even if this is just a situation where, like, Jean was...
You still killed a child.
Yeah, like, she still... It's just, like, I don't think it should... Even if it was just, like, a series of unfortunate events, I don't think it should ever be scrubbed from her record, purely because I think, from what I understand, if it's scrubbed from her record, she's now able to adopt again. You know? Which I don't think she should be allowed to adopt again. And, like, yeah, maybe she made a mistake in terms of adopting a child that had, like, a lot of extra needs that she wasn't prepared to meet, but it also just shows like a lack of self-awareness. And I'm not going to say that she can't like learn and change, but I also just think let's not take that risk.
I think if you kill one kid, you don't get another.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think that you pretty much scorched earth. I think like the court felt bad for her because of how remorseful she was, and that's why they decided to scrub it from her record. But I feel like that's an overcorrection on their part.
Absolutely massive.
And
especially because they let her lie there. I would have been like, okay, I'm gonna check.
That's what I'm saying. Like, her being a
now.
nurse, I think, really adds like another layer to this, where like really you can't look past that, I think.
And then not even attempting to do CPR herself is...
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's just too many things here that like, do I think that she like intentionally brought Candace on this trip thinking she was gonna die? No, but like, it's also just such severe negligence that like, you know, I don't think we can really look past it. Also, like, this was a landmark case. They ended up creating in Colorado Candace's Law after this, which made this practice of like the rebirthing ceremony illegal.
Good.
Because it previously wasn't. And a few other states have since penned comparable laws. They're not like named after Candace, but they're like the same kind of thing. Because like I said, like, this isn't just like this one crazy lady doing this. This is like a thing.
A practice.
Where they all like do the swaddling suffocation thing.
Crazy.
Yeah. I don't know who popularized it. If anyone knows, like, definitely like put it in the comments. Then in 2006, Watkins got interviewed by ABC News, and when they asked her about all of this, she tried to say that this was Candace's fault, which is why I'm inclined to feel like this lady is just like a sadist, because like, what are you talking about? She refused any accountability. She said no one was on Candace, which is a bold statement when there's footage and like, people are on her.
Yeah.
You're on her.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And then she blamed Candace by saying that she could have escaped if she wanted to. Basically implying that she just chose to commit unaliving via these 5 adults, which is just the most insane rationalization I've ever heard in my life. Yeah. Nobody else, like, from what I could tell, has made any, like, additional statements since, like, the original trial, except for Watkins. And she said that to ABC News. Like, she said that with her
That's
whole
her
chest.
best take.
Yeah, like that's her. She sat down.
That's her camera practice.
And media trained and like tried to put a PR spin on it, and that was like what she thought was appropriate.
She thought that was gonna resonate.
Yeah. She's gross. Yeah, it just shows that like she has absolutely like zero remorse whatsoever. You know, because like if she was remorseful, she would have been remorseful. That's your chance to like apologize to the world, and she chose to do that instead.
Well, she's where she needs to be.
Absolutely.
That's crazy. I'm surprised none of the other inmates have like.
I'm wondering like how they have her set up in prison, because like they might just not know. Post ABC interview, unlikely they would have to know, but I'm saying before that they might not know. Like she might have just done a good job lying about like why she was in there, and maybe none of the guards like outed her.
I would have.
But post ABC interview, I'm assuming like they probably had to just like separate her.
Because people don't do well with child killers.
Yeah. So I'm assuming they probably had to separate her from everybody else.
Maybe that's just men. I'm not sure.
No, it goes both ways for sure. For sure. There's a lot of moms in prison who don't get to see their kids. A lot. There's a lot of women who get their sentencing when they're pregnant and have their babies, and then their babies are taken away.
Yeah, so that's why I'm like, she's
there's
still alive.
No way. Yeah, like I have to assume that they've just had to take extra measures to like prevent her from getting taken out. Any closing thoughts on this case?
Like, Jean had my sympathy up until the whole rebirthing treatment, and I feel like had she not been
a nurse.
No, not even had she not been a nurse. Had she not listened to that psychiatrist and done this retreat, had she just done like a lesser retreat, had she just gone on like a normal getaway, and seen like the positive results she saw in the first week.
That's what I'm saying. Like there was some positive results. So like had she gone to like maybe something that was a little hippy dippy but not like crossing into the realm of dangerous, that probably would have given her all the positives with none of the negatives.
Right, and then maybe you could be like, all right, maybe Candace just needs to like have a monthly getaway where she gets away and like we go have fun,
Well, I feel like even just for Jean seeing even mild progress would have been like huge. Like it would have just been a huge relief to know that like she's doing something right. And that probably would have really healed their relationship in a lot of ways as well.
And I guess I have to play devil's advocate. I guess her seeing the improvements of the first week would make
add,
her
like, some
feel incentivized
trust.
To do the second week.
That's what I'm saying. That's why, like, the first half of the ceremony, I do feel bad for Jean because she's clearly really buying into it. So it makes me feel like she was really hopeful. Yeah. But, like, still, like, I think, like, her hope and her desperation kind of, like, eclipsed what would have probably been, like, initial concerns with, like, the blanket being over her head. Mm-hmm. But then it obviously hits a point not too long into it, like, about, like, 2 minutes into it, where I think she should have reacted differently.
The defecation and vomiting should have been, like,
that should have been definitely, like...
That would be, like, the maximum.
But I even think just, like, a few minutes in when, like, she's, like, I can't breathe... I think the fact that, like, Jean wasn't like, oh, like, let's give her a little room for air, and then it would have been different if they were like, oh, no, like, all the kids say this, don't worry, she's perfectly safe. Like, that conversation didn't even happen, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, I think that's where, like, Jean really, like, lost to me, is, like, she should have had some concerns, and, like, I think she just really wanted this to, like, work. But, like, again... It's like that only gets Jean so far, like if she hadn't have been a nurse, if she had just been like a normal person who has no experience with any of this, I think like she still would have probably had like a reaction at like the vomiting, and then I think any reasonable person would have lost their sympathy at that point regardless of her occupation. But between, like, the vomiting and then the not checking in when the adults are taking a break, it's all just, like, it just seems a little too detached.
Having full-on, like, someone pressing down on your head with a pillow, and then 4 other adults also doing
that's
that
what I'm
on the
saying,
rest
like,
of your
and
body.
nobody is like, oh wait, that's her head. Like, I would have been like, oh wait, like, not her head.
Right.
You know? And like, it would be different if they were like, no, this is what we do here. But again, like, I still wouldn't have believed that personally. But like,
No.
I would at least extend a little sympathy to somebody who is showing some concerns, and then their concerns are being addressed, and they're like, no, this is how it always is. Don't worry, like, this is what every kid does. This is how it always is. We've never had a problem. But like that, again, like that conversation not happening is like a big problem.
At the very least, I'd have been like, I would have heard the whole procedure and be like, this is okay? And then I'd been like, okay, let me do it then. And then swaddle me up, put me in a blanket, have you guys press down. And then I'd be like, no way, no, you guys, no, this.
Yeah, and like, again, like, we have to remember, like, Candace's behavioral issues were really severe. She's like committing arson, she's killed her goldfish.
I'm saying as the adult.
No, I know. So I'm saying, like, I do see why, like, you know, Jean would end up seeking out, like, a weird tactic where, like, there could have been people in Jean's life who were like, are you sure about this? This sounds weird. But if you're Jean, it's easy to be like, I know, it does sound really weird, but I've tried everything. But again, just, like, her not having a reaction, like, I know that she was likely hopeful, and, like, she was just trying to, like, help Candace, but like once the vomiting happened, like there's just no rationalizing it at that point. And like even then, like if they had stopped right there, like Candace could have very well like experienced some brain damage from like lack of oxygen and stuff, which would worsen her behavioral issues. Like I said, like the fact that she threw up and defecated herself and the people there had no reaction makes me feel like that's happened with plenty of other children, which to me means it's entirely possible that there are other children who have been through this program who experienced oxygen deprivation, whose behavioral issues could have very well gotten worse due to that lack of oxygen for an extended period of time.
I'm surprised once the case came out that, and like they did the ABC interview, that more kids didn't come out and say, yeah, my parents maybe do that. And like,
I think that they did. Like, I didn't see that. Like, I didn't go that deep into that element of it, but I feel like they must have, because I feel like that would have probably factored in when they made that law. But yeah, that's today's case.
That's wild.
If you guys made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I have 10,000.2 subscribers now.
Hell yeah.
I'm getting excited. If you haven't watched the podcast, please watch the podcast. I know you guys are here for true crime, but I am putting a lot of work into this podcast, so please give it a chance.
It's really great. She puts a lot of effort into all the interview questions. She gets really cool guests. Like, I don't think there's been a podcast that I've watched where I haven't laughed throughout about 80% of it. And then the other 20% is like cool shit I didn't know. So
Thanks,
yeah,
babe.
podcast is really cool. Plus, like, there's like, if you can't watch the YouTube video, there's always like the audio element. So like, if you're just doing stuff around the house, I watch it on like Apple Podcasts. Mm-hmm. How else can you? Spotify?
Yeah,
too?
it's also on Spotify as well.
Yeah, so Apple, Spotify, and then if you're sitting around, you want to watch something while you eat, throw it up there, man. They're only an hour, so
yeah, take a break from the negative subjects, and the podcast is all generally very lighthearted. Like, at most we'll talk about like interesting topical things, but it never gets like dark, you know. It might get like serious in terms of like asking like analytical questions, but it's generally very positive.
Definitely more catered to like a nice evening, like dinner, like, you know, or like a nice lunch, you know.
Thanks, babe.
Like, I'd say Spooky Saturday is more like if you have like date like movie night and you're
Spooky Saturday, if I was one of my listeners, I would play it while I'm doing chores, probably.
Really?
Yeah, like washing the dishes or doing laundry.
I always imagine it like, there's a bowl of popcorn. We're like, oh, what is she gonna talk
You think they're just watching me? I have like no visual aids. Anyone who is watching me, I'm impressed. But I hope you're on your phone also or something.
Comment below what you do when you are watching Daisy's Spooky Saturday, because I'm honestly very curious.
I think I'm on the money. I think it's going to be like 80% people being like, I play it in the background while I'm walking around the house or I'm driving. Because like that's what I do when I listen to true crime, is I always just like play it.
You know what's crazy? I was listening to true crime while I was working out today.
See, I'm telling you, he used to not even be into true crime, but I'm like, it's so interesting.
Well, she got me into it.
If you guys made it this far and you haven't liked the video, consider it. Consider it. Just consider it. No pressure. Just perchance, just consider it. And if you haven't subscribed, also consider it. I don't know. Like, no pressure. But anyway, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.